Welcome back to the Weekly Cup. It's Eric Banghart, Manager of Global Sales, kicking off another edition featuring our own territory manager, Sandy Fisher. Backed by popular demand, as Sandy tells it, you've seen him, love him, and crave more insight into security design. Armed with his PSP superpowers, Sandy will take us through a presentation highlighting some of the guiding principles of designing a successful security plan and integrating appropriate wireless solutions along the way. Today's presentation is titled A Structured Approach to Creating a Physical Security Plan. Sandy manages our Rocky Mountain region stretching into and including Canada. Please keep those comments and questions coming throughout today's presentation for Q&A at the end. And please take a swing at stumping the expert with tough questions. Sandy, drop some knowledge on us.
All right, and here we are. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for showing up today. So what we are going to do, let's get a slideshow, there we are, and we're good. So what we're going to do is take concepts that we already know, but we're going to organize them into a model. And what we can do is through the process of critical thinking, take a question or supposition, crank it through that model, and evaluate what comes out in a consistent manner, and in turn, help our end user customers make better informed decisions when it comes to their physical security plan. As always, we begin with the end in mind, so you want to start with the goals of the plan. Then you'll come up with policies and procedures to support that plan, as well as the resources that will be deployed to support those policies and procedures. So the four main topics we're going to talk about are threat identification. That's making a list of all the bad things that can happen. Then threat assessment. What is the likelihood of that threat occurring? Risk assessment. Now, risk is different from threat. Risk is the result of the bad thing happening. And we will see what we can do to measure that qualitatively or quantitatively. And then risk management. What do we do about that risk? And we'll cover the four of the main categories of risk management. So let's start with our first poll question, and that is, do you work with your end user customers on their physical security plan, yes or no? So let's wait for the answers to come in, and let's see what we get.
We're still voting here, still coming in. About 85% of people have voted. Okay, great. It's slowing down a little bit, but we've got 92% participation. Thanks, guys. Thanks for voting. Let me show you the answers here, Sandy.
So most of you do, and that's really good. Good stuff. Okay. All right, so let's start with threat identification. This is a good homework assignment that you could give to a security director or a loss prevention manager before you're going to meet with them and work with them on their plan. So make it as detailed as possible, such as specific points of intrusion, because those could be addressed with different kinds of sensing strategies when it comes to an intrusion system. Theft can typically be managed quantitatively with a dollar amount. We'll talk about vandalism, kidnapping when we go through a couple of examples. And these concepts not only apply to physical security, but also to safety and even public health for that matter. Then threat assessment, how likely is that threat actually to occur? So that would be very unlikely to likely. And we'll also touch on vulnerability when we get into the examples. Then risk assessment. Like I said, this is the result of the threat having occurred. Sometimes we talk about those interchangeably, but we really want to make sure that we separate them, because you could have a threat likelihood of very low, but with risk being extreme, so we do take measures. So we'll talk about those examples when we get through the last couple of slides of this. And so risk can be also quantitatively or qualitatively measured, but there can be intangibles. So if there's workplace violence, one result could be the unease of other employees. And if an employee quits, then there's a dollar amount that it would take to hire and retrain a replacement. So that's risk assessment. And then risk management. So here's the 4 major categories we'll discuss. Risk assumption means you do nothing about it and you take it as it comes. Risk transfer means you get somebody else to assume that risk for you, such as purchasing insurance. Keep in mind with the risk transfer, there is always some residual risk, like the payment of premiums, as well as the administrative cost when it comes to processing a claim. Risk avoidance or risk elimination would be something like you decide to build a data center, but not in a floodplain or in an area that's prone to hurricanes. Risk mitigation is reducing the outcome of a threat that has occurred. And that's the name of the game in the security industry. That's what we do. We mitigate risk. So let's talk about how we do that, primarily with policies and procedures. That's always the cornerstone, I believe, or one of the cornerstones of a good physical security plan. And different resources can be, for example, a physical deployment could be, for example, bollards to reduce the impact of if a vehicle tries to crash into a building. Human deployment could be things like bodyguards or staff doing a little bit of a neighborhood sweep at a school before pickup and drop off. And then there's technology deployment, and that's us. So intrusion detection, access control, and video management systems. So let's talk about some of those technology deployments. For intrusion detection, that's going to mitigate risk by virtue of reducing the damage that an adversary can do when it comes to theft and vandalism. And in the life of an alarm, there's detect, delay, respond. So detection is when the alarm is tripped and ideally verified and notified. And that's when the clock starts ticking from that point to when the adversary can reach their goal. And we want response time to be shorter than delay time. And getting that response there quickly, that will mitigate risk because it reduces the outcome of the break-in. We talk about things like uncontrolled openings and motion-triggered video events. All of those things address risk and in some cases, threat as well. As certainly call for help. We'll talk about one of those examples in behavioral health, and enunciation points are also good for summoning a response. So let's go ahead and run through some examples. So I just set up a very simple spreadsheet. This is a very simple version, I would say, in terms of what you would actually do, but the columns will be threat likelihood, vulnerability, risk amount, and then what risk management method will we employ. So let's just go through a few. So the first one, CEO kidnapping of a business that is not controversial. So I put that threat likelihood as very low, but that CEO could be just walking around out in the open. So that's still high vulnerability. The risk is injury or loss of life, as well as payment of a ransom. So risk amount could be high, but because in this case, threat likelihood is very low, the method could be here, risk assumption. However, let's go to the second one. If the business is controversial, such as working on climate change or genetically modified organisms. So let's say threat likelihood jumps up to low or even medium, the vulnerability and risk are still the same, risk amount is high, but we can mitigate that risk with training of that CEO, perhaps providing a bodyguard, which can also reduce vulnerability. Museum theft. Now, this is something that we can measure qualitatively. So let's say there's an exhibit that's worth $1 million. So that museum is probably going to transfer risk by purchasing insurance, but also if there's visible security technology or a security guard, that can also reduce threat likelihood and vulnerability. Okay, so this next one, active shooter, that's the one that keeps us up at night. And I know this is going to sound a little bit harsh, but this is the time for us to discuss these things when we are cool and calm. So if there's an active shooter outside of a school, for example, although threat likelihood, I would still say is low, but vulnerability is extreme. Risk, multiple injuries, multiple loss of life. So that means risk amount is also extreme. We can mitigate that with panic alarms, radios, lockdown coordination with law enforcement. Bleed out kits are important. We sometimes hear about these things if we attend a seminar on active shooter incident management, where they say, stop the bleeding, stop the dying. So what that bleed out kit does is if somebody gets injured with a gunshot, we can prevent their death with a bleed out kit. So it becomes an injury rather than death. That is risk mitigation at its core. Active shooter inside, that's very similar, only more technology comes into play with not only panic alarms, but intrusion detection, access control, and also video. And a good thing if you want to follow up, look up U.S. Secret Service and threat teams. There are some really good documents online that you can find that talk about those sorts of things. Berg, this is what we do a lot at Inovonics, where the risk is loss or damage to property, and intrusion alarms will summon a response, so that can again mitigate risk. Two-way audio on some panels so that you can let a perpetrator know that they have been detected, and that might give them a chance to think twice about what they're doing. Violence at a behavioral clinic, the risk would be injury, and what we do is duress alarm signaling to summon a response. And I always like to talk about how if there's an intrusion panel, if it's a Bosch panel, that can send emails as well as make a point of enunciation. We also work with a number of folks that have specialty platforms that work with two-way radios. So those are all good options for risk management, for risk mitigation, I should say, when it comes to any kind of workplace violence. And as well as the human policies and procedures, training of staff, things like that. All of those are part of risk management when it comes to workplace violence. So this was a very brief snapshot of one of the aspects of the PSP program that I went to, which is physical security planning. So I hope you found that useful, and it's a really good place to start if you want to learn more about that sort of thing. Let's showcase the application of the day, and then we'll open it up to questions. So this is very concerning right now. So people going to restaurants and dining outside, which is, I would say, fairly safe. I've been avoiding going inside, but I might go to a restaurant outside. And what I've noticed is, look at the mask that this waiter is wearing. It's the kind of mask that does not protect him, it protects others, okay? But what that waiter is doing is meeting in close contact, even though it's outside, is talking to and talking with many people who are not wearing masks, because you go to a restaurant, you're going to eat and drink, you take your mask off. So the threat here is that waiter catching the virus and potentially spreading it to other employees. And then, of course, risk is how sick you get and whether or not you die from the virus. So I'm going to show you an application that will increase both the safety of customers and employees. And this, primarily addresses threat. Now, I know that restaurants right now probably are not spending a lot of money, but this is a good investment because it could help keep them open to reduce the threat likelihood of somebody getting sick. What I've shown here is a Flare Electronics Annunciator panel. And you see how it says room 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? You can change those very easily to be table numbers. And then you could mount a call button at each table. So instead of the waiter coming by repeatedly and asking you if you want to order something or if you need anything, this can help minimize that person-to-person interaction in a restaurant, so that could reduce the threat likelihood of the waiter getting the virus from an asymptomatic patron. And so what you could do is mount that push for help call button on each table on like a little pop-up happy hour menu. It could be one of our pendants, or it could be that call button that I showed you. The functional difference would be if it's the call station, which is this guy right here, you push the button and it latches in, and the light on the panel will turn on and it'll give you a light. So that panel would be mounted, for example, at the waiter station or at the manager station at the restaurant. And then when help arrives, they press the button again, it pops out, and that would clear the light. If you want to go simpler and mount an Inovonics pendant on there, because of the way that works, when you what you would do is reset the annunciator panel, and that would clear all the lights. So they would just have to keep track to make sure that everyone who is calling for a server has been addressed. So this would work not only in restaurants, but any kind of a service call application. So that is the application of the day. And that is it, short and sweet, to the point, as I like to go. So let's see if we have any questions.
Great, thanks, Andy. We do have a couple questions. Go ahead and pull them up here. Okay, so first question for you today is, what do you think about using a dummy camera in a parking lot to make people think there's a video surveillance system?
So, okay, so with video surveillance, I like to talk about things in threes. So video exists for three reasons. Shows you what's happening, it shows you what happened, and it deters bad behavior. And that's my favorite, because above all else, video reveals the truth. Now, I did hear anecdotally once about a dummy camera being mounted. There was an assault outside, and the people who were assaulted contacted that particular business and found out that it was a dummy camera. So I think there was some litigation. I don't know if this is just urban legend, but my point is, if you're going to do that, just get even an inexpensive camera and hook it up to something. So you've always got some kind of a record of what happened in case that should come up. And that just goes to managing your liability when you are deploying physical security technology.
Okay, great. Next question. Can you somehow release a foam to fill a room and trap an intruder?
So believe it or not, this is not the first time I've heard this question. Think about, if you're going to take extreme measures, first of all, it should match the extreme nature of the application or what is being protected. And this also comes back to liability. You know, let's say there's an accidental activation, and well, certainly that could be very inconvenient for cleanup, but you also want to make sure that you don't injure a perpetrator, even though they may deserve it. But the point is, we save that type of punishment for much, much later in the process of catching an intruder. This also reminds me of a video I saw at a local expo. It was an anti-graffiti system where if it thought somebody was about to do graffiti, it sprayed hot pepper spray, which could do a lot of damage. So, and then I looked recently, and I don't think that ever got deployed because they probably realized that was just way too much liability. So again, if the nature of what you're protecting is extreme, yes, look at some extreme measures, but make sure you manage your liability and be careful of accidental activations.
Okay, great. Let's see. Oh, Frank just had some feedback. He said dummy cameras have been challenged in court and found undesirable, so not recommended.
Exactly. And yeah, and that's why I said, even if it's an inexpensive camera, and hook it up to something.
And he also
Absolutely.
said
Good call.
that he also believes the physical security plans require significant training to be effective.
Absolutely, and that goes into policies and procedures, as well as training of staff at the end user level. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Thank you, Frank.
All right, so I think that's all of our questions and feedback today. Before I go along and pass this to Eric, I did want to share our link for next week. Let's see. So next week, we will have our very own Chris Allen presenting, and he'll be discussing residential applications beyond intrusion. So let me just go ahead and share that link. Okay, the link is there in the chat if you are interested in registering to join us next Tuesday for our discussion. And with that, oh wait, before I hand it over, one more. Oh no, it's just a comment. Just excellent overview and thank you so much. All right, Eric, go ahead and announce our winners today.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Sandy, for the thoughtful content addressing what's top of mind for security directors and businesses today. Here's our coffee card winners for today for signing up or attending the presentation. Steve Rodino with StopTech, Bruce Weinberg with ADT, and Jim Braun with Prices Alarms. Thanks again for making us part of your Tuesday and the Weekly Cup. Cheers.
Bye-bye.